Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. And before I jump into today's episode, make sure you visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com. Also, follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss anything. And share this episode with family and friends and on social media. Now, today, I am going to be talking about an important topic because with each passing day, it seems we are losing a little more of our sanity here in the United States and throughout the broader Western world. We see all these self-inflicted wounds and we're destroying our civilization. For those of you that may be around my age, right? You were born in the 1980s. I was born in 1980. I want you to think back 25, 30 years ago. Did you ever imagine that we would be where we are today as a nation? Did you ever imagine that we would be debating half the crap we're debating today? When you sit back and actually think about it, think about how far we have drifted. So over the next few weeks, and starting today, I want to explore where we went so wrong, what's happened in our society, and today my focus is going to be on the self-anointed guardians of democracy. You've heard me use this phrase time and time again. I brought this idea of these guardians of democracy in previous episodes, and in 1996, the great Thomas Sowell published The Vision of the Anointed. It's a great book. Everyone should actually read it. Unfortunately, the very people that Sowell was warning about and referring to in his book now hold the levers of power throughout our society. They have infiltrated just about every single industry you could think of. And these self-proclaimed guardians of democracy, they have mastered the art of virtue signaling. They really have. I mean, they present themselves as the champions of justice and liberty and equality. But despite all their virtue signaling, despite all their calls for protecting the Republic and upholding democratic norms, they remain the biggest threat to the Republic. And their desperate grip on power blinds them to the consequences of their actions. They don't even see it. They are willing to go to any length to maintain their influence and control. And it's crucial for us to understand the role that these individuals play in the broader political landscape because they do have power and their actions have far-reaching consequences. We're feeling the impacts today, and it does impact our republic and the future of the republic. But also it undermines the trust and faith the American people have in the political system itself. After the Constitutional Convention, someone asked Benjamin Franklin, what type of government did you give us? And his response was a republic if you could keep it. But it seems like we may not be able to keep it. If we keep down this current trend, we are not going to be able to keep it. And we bear some of the responsibility in that. We have ourselves to blame in some of this. However, we have to confront the uncomfortable truths surrounding the self-anointed guardians of democracy because these people will stop at nothing to maintain their power. When I say the self-anointed guardians of democracy, I need to define what I mean because I'm sure everyone has heard of the deep state, but that really doesn't tell you much. That doesn't really crystallize it. There are many who believe that these people serve at the highest levels of government and everything is coordinated, everything is organized, that it's all planned and it's meticulously planned. However, that's not really true. While there certainly is some coordination, while there certainly is some type of planning that does exist, it is far more complicated and goes far beyond those in positions of power just within government. It's not as organized as so many people believe. In fact, you have a whole bunch of people that are part of this virtue signaling class, the self-anointed, who aren't really that smart. Let's be honest about it. They're just lemmings. They parrot whatever they hear. They toe a narrative. That's all they do. All you have to do is watch the media day in, day out, and you see. This creates what I deem as the unholy alliance, and it consists of those in the government, media, the corporate world, big tech, academia, science, other industries that exist out there. But one of the main attributes these people lack is any semblance of self-awareness whatsoever. And then you factor in what little regard they have for the American people, and it's easy to see what they will do to retain power and control. And they don't even try and pretend anymore. It's not like they even try and hide it. I mean, we have news breaking right now. You have Hunter Biden, and I'm going to get to the charges that have been leveled, the plea agreement that was coordinated between Hunter Biden's attorneys and the Department of Justice, because it really is stunning and it encapsulates everything that's wrong within our society right now. So I'm going to get to that a little bit later on. What I want to do now is I want to start off by playing a clip for you. This was Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman over the weekend appearing with President Biden. Take a listen.
And now I'm standing next to the president again, next to a collapsed bridge here. And he is here to commit to work with the governor and the delegation to make sure that we get this fixed quick, fast as well, too. This is a president that is committed to infrastructure. Yeah, and then on top of that, the dual kind of law of the inflation bill that is going to make sure that there's going to be bridges all across America getting rebuilt.
Folks, that is a sitting senator of the United States representing the great state of Pennsylvania. This is an embarrassment. This is a mockery of our system. Did any of you out there understand what he was talking about? When we look at Senator Fetterman, it is a travesty of what they are doing to this man by putting him out there like that. I mean, he can't even clearly read off a teleprompter, let alone we have no idea what he's able to comprehend and what he's not able to comprehend. Now, I'm not sitting here making fun of Fetterman. I actually feel sorry for him. I think this is a crime that's being perpetrated on him from those around him, including the Democrat Party that allowed this to take place. Now, this is an audio podcast, so obviously you couldn't watch the video, but standing next to Fetterman was President Biden. And when you look at Fetterman, I mean, Fetterman, he was wearing his classic, hooded sweatshirt and a pair of shorts. This is a senator. This is who is supposed to represent the people of Pennsylvania. We don't even know what his mental capabilities are at this point. Let's be honest here. Again, it's about being honest. If you saw this guy on the street, what are you going to think to yourself? You're going to think he's a bum. He's a homeless person. That's what's going to go through your mind. You're not going to sit there and your first impression be that this is a sitting United States senator. The amazing part is how when we know that John Fetterman had a severe stroke, this was right before the general election really began in 2022. The Democrat Party had plenty of time to remove Fetterman off the ticket and replace Fetterman with someone else, maybe a Conor Lamb, who while I disagree with Conor Lamb on a lot of things, the reality is he's far more capable and competent. He has his mental faculties in place. And so he would have better represented Pennsylvania than John Fetterman ever could. Yet the Democrat Party didn't care. They still thrusted John Fetterman on the people of Pennsylvania. So what does that tell you? It tells you that they have no regard for you. It tells you that they have no regard for the Democrat voters in the state of Pennsylvania. See, they didn't want to replace John Fetterman and put on a Conor Lamb because Conor Lamb isn't going to be easily as controllable as John Fetterman is if John Fetterman is suffering from cognitive health problems. And that's what it was about. It was control. However, you can't escape putting blame on the voters of Pennsylvania because it was clear as day something was wrong. I mean, John Fetterman was gone for most of the campaign. And when he did emerge and when he did start making campaign stops, everyone with their own eyes could see the health effects of what Fetterman was going through. And yet they still voted for him. They had a choice. They could either vote for a person that does brain surgery or they could vote for a person that has some brain damage. And they chose to vote for the person that has brain damage because they couldn't stand to vote for someone like Dr. Oz. Now, I'm not telling people how to vote. People can vote for any which way they want. But when you sit there and you knowingly cast a ballot for this individual, for Senator Fetterman, knowing that he has severe health issues, knowing that he may never recover from the severe stroke he had, knowing that the prognosis on Senator Fetterman isn't all that great, well, what does it say about you? What does it say about we, the people in the United States, that they're willing to vote for it? And again, I want to remind people that President Biden was standing right next to John Fetterman. So it really presents a powerful image where you have these two people. One is extremely old. The other one isn't actually all that old. And this is who's representing the United States. I mean, imagine being a foreign country. Imagine being Xi Jinping of China and being part of Xi Jinping's staff, and you're watching this, and you see this going on. What do you think is going through their minds? What do you think is going through Vladimir Putin's mind as he sees clips of this play out? And again, it's not just John Fetterman. I mean, here's a clip of President Biden, who was in Connecticut giving a speech about gun control. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Remember who we are. We're the United States of America. And there's nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. We can get this done. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean it. Thank you. Now, as some of you know, I'd usually come down and say hi to all of you. They'd tell me there's a storm coming in. Is that right? Is that still the deal? That's the truth. Now, don't make a lie. As that scene in the John Wayne movie, don't make me a dog-faced lion pony soldier. All right, well, I tell you what. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask the White House photographer to come up. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to stand. I usually shake everybody's hand, but I'm going to stand in front of each section. No, I really mean it. And if you can see the camera, they can see you. And it's the least consequential part of this whole meeting for you. I promise. All right? God save the Queen, man.
What the hell was that? What was that? I mean, that was just a bunch of incoherent rambling. And then at the end, he says, God save the Queen. Despite the fact the Queen's been dead for, 10 months now she's been dead? But even if I give him a pass that the Queen's been dead for several months, he's not in Britain. He's not speaking to a bunch of British people. What does God save the Queen have to do with speaking about gun control to Americans in Connecticut? Well, it has nothing to do with it. But this guy doesn't even know where he is. Here's another clip of him on June 19th. Take a listen to this one.
And maybe most important, I've committed that by 2020, we will have conserved 30% of all the lands and waters the United States has jurisdiction over, and simultaneously reduce emissions to blunt climate impact.
2020? It's now 2023. What is he talking about? Now, I want to make clear that everyone, when they speak a lot, you're going to make gaffes. I make gaffes. It happens. It's going to happen. However, these aren't gaffes by President Biden. It's clearly the decline of his cognitive abilities. We see it day in and day out. Now, you're not allowed to talk about it. Nobody wants to admit it because the self-anointed guardians of democracy say that if you bring up President Biden's health, if you criticize President Biden in any way, you may be a domestic terrorist. So they want you to stay hush-hush on it. But we can't hide what we see and hear with our own eyes and ears. And the rest of the world sees it as well, as I say. And then you take someone like Senator Dianne Feinstein. Now, I don't have any clips of her because they won't even let her talk in public. But there are reports that she's so far gone that either Alzheimer's or dementia or just plain being senile has progressed so far that she has no idea who she is, where she is. And this is a real growing concern. I mean, we're talking about a leading senator in Dianne Feinstein, someone that's been in that institution for decades. You're talking about Senator John Fetterman, and you're talking about the President of the United States, President Biden. And what do the three of them have in common? Well, they don't have the mental capacity to be in the positions that they're in. And if there's one common trait that you see with all three of them, look closely at their eyes. The eyes tell a lot. Listen, my mother, she was diagnosed with dementia when she was 48 years old. She passed away at 63 years old. So I know the stages of how bad dementia gets. I know the stare that exists when it comes to dementia. And when I looked in my mother's eyes, I see those same eyes now in Biden, in Fetterman, in Dianne Feinstein. Now, I'm not a doctor, so all of you out there, I'm not trying to play doctor, but clearly we have a problem. And for all you that are going to try and criticize me for pointing out the obvious, I want to ask you, I mean, if you had to get surgery, let's say you had to get heart surgery, and these three were your surgeons. They studied in medical school. They were doctors for years upon years upon years. And then you saw them and they were speaking like this. They were acting in this way. They always look confused. They look like they don't understand where they are. Would you want that person performing surgery on you? Would you? Clearly not. But yet we're going to say that it's okay for them to be president of the United States. We're going to say it's okay for them to be sitting senators. But what these examples clearly show and epitomize is the self-anointed guardians of democracy, that they will do whatever it takes to keep their levels of control, because each three that I just mentioned are easily controllable. What we're seeing here is clearly abuse. I mean, it's elder abuse, it's healthcare abuse, mental health abuse. It's clearly abuse, what we're witnessing. But they don't care. As long as they could dictate where these people stand on the issues, as long as they could dictate what the president's going to do and what he can't do, as long as they could dictate what bills Fetterman needs to agree to and which ones he votes no to, same thing with Senator Feinstein, they're happy because they get to maintain their power and influence within the system. So the people that are elected to represent us aren't really representing us, they're representing the guardians of democracy, the elites within our society that think they know better than the average American, and that have, as I said at the beginning, little regard for the American people. We're going to take a quick break right now, and when we get back, I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to focus on the lack of regard they have for the American people and how they don't care what the American people have to think, but more importantly, they lack any sense of self-awareness. So sit tight, we'll be right back. Listen up, P.A.S. report audience. Experts say that China is hoarding a massive amount of food. They're soon going to have over 2/3 of the globe's corn reserves, over half its rice reserves, and over half its wheat reserves. But when asked about it, China lies. And one expert says that they, of course, will never admit to doing something like that. Well, what does China know that we don't? When it comes to the global food shortages, China is the canary in the coal mine. And you have to understand, China is the world's #1 food importer. They rely on the rest of the world to keep their people fed, so they can't afford to mess up. There'll be riots, civil panic, or even worse, when over 1 billion people can't eat, it's going to create a crisis for them. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for Americans like me and you? Food shortages. That's why it's a smart idea to stock up on a kit of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food. Create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits. It's hand-packed in the United States. The kits are compact, stack easily. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and I can attest to that because I use 4 Patriots, and their 5-star reviews on the website rave about the flavor and taste. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food by typing in the code P.A.S. at checkout. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code P.A.S. to get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food. That's 4patriots.com. Use code PAS. Welcome back, everyone. And when it comes to the anointed ones, we saw another glaring example of the double standards that exist. One for those that are under the protection of the anointed ones, and then another set of standards for everyone else, the peons, the peasant class out there. It really is stunning when you look at the hypocrisy that exists, and it's so overt and obvious. I mean, last week I did an entire episode on the idea that no one's above the law is laughable. And I pointed out the glaring example with Hillary Clinton, with James Comey, James Clapper, John Brennan, and all these other people. But we got another example, right? We didn't have to wait long. It's only a week later, so we could add another example to the list. And that's Hunter Biden. 5-year investigation into Hunter Biden. 5 years. And we now know the charges that are being leveled against Hunter Biden. So a plea agreement has been reached. Hunter Biden is going to plead guilty to 2 counts of failing to pay income taxes, and then those counts are now dropped down to misdemeanors. Now, if you out there, part of the peasant class, fail to pay your taxes intentionally, what do you think is happening to you? Do you think that you're going to get such a sweet deal from the IRS? And the answer is obviously no. You know, it's also interesting. I mean, think about the timing of this. So a month ago, we have an IRS whistleblower coming out saying that the case is being slow-walked, saying that it's being handled differently than ordinary people's cases would be handled, and that, you know, political favors are being done. And sure enough, a month later, they charge him, and he gets a sweet plea agreement. Not only does he only have to plead guilty to 2 counts of tax evasion, failing to pay income taxes, which are misdemeanor counts, he's not going to do any jail time for that. The felony gun charges against him are also going to get dismissed as long as he meets a certain set of conditions. So the anointed ones, they protect themselves. They protect the family members of those that are anointed. They protect the people within this little bubble. And we see it day in, day out. I mean, again, do you think that if you got charged with any type of gun violation, do you think that those charges would ultimately be dropped against you? These are the same people that want to investigate parents that complain at school board meetings as domestic terrorists. And it amazes me because a 5-year investigation, that's a long time. Just think, the documents, Trump documents, 7 months, special counsel investigation. Here, it's 5 years. Now, remember, during the Trump years, everyone was screaming about FARA violations, that people didn't register as foreign agents even though they were being paid by foreign companies. Here, you have Hunter Biden, who's being paid an enormous amount of money by foreign entities, from Burisma to receiving money from China to receiving money from the Moscow mayor's wife, Romania. I mean, just you name it. He was receiving money from some type of oligarch somewhere. So here he is making millions upon millions of dollars from all these foreign entities, and nobody says anything about FARA anymore. Notice that. Nobody ever says, hey, Hunter Biden didn't register as a foreign agent even when his daddy was vice president, and the obvious reason that he was earning millions of dollars from all these foreign entities was to influence the public policy of the United States. So you see the double standards that exist. And the anointed ones simply don't care because it's about them. It's not about you. It's not about the people. And that's the thing. They've abandoned the people. See, these idiots, they don't realize. They constantly complain about President Trump. They relentlessly seek to remove former President Trump from the political stage by any means necessary. You saw endless investigations into him. You saw several impeachments into him. There were constant leaks about him and his administration. Everything was designed to take him down. Any means necessary. And they still don't realize that the reason former President Trump won in 2016 was because of them, was because of the anointed ones, because of these self-anointed guardians of democracy. They still don't realize that they fueled the very circumstances that led to the ascent of former President Trump. And it's because they abandoned the American people. They usurped power for their own gain. They decided that they know what's in your best interest better than you do. And therefore, we must surrender our power to them in order to let them run our lives. See, they are willing to do whatever it takes to keep their hold on power, even if it means sacrificing the very principles that they're claiming to defend. They're nothing but a bunch of frauds, and they have no self-awareness. Everything that they accuse their political opponents of being guilty of, they themselves are guilty of. And you don't have to sit there and be a rocket scientist to figure this out. We see example after example after example of this each and every day. They claim Trump and his supporters, well, they're fascists. They're part of a cult. They're the biggest threat to the constitutional republic that we've ever faced before. The biggest threat. Now think about that a second. When President Trump was in power, how many political opponents did he jail? How many members of the press did he throw in jail? How many people did he throw in jail that criticized him or his administration or made fun of him? I want you to think about that a minute. Because look at what we have today. If you criticize President Obama, he's the one calling the shots. But if we criticize President Biden, well, you're not allowed to do that. You're a threat. If you criticize government policies, if you criticize the bureaucracies, well, then you're expressing anti-government, anti-authority sentiment. They never define what that really means. It's so open-ended that it can mean anything. A minor criticism. I mean, just think North Korea. You express any dismay with the government. If there's a power outage, not that many places in North Korea have power, but if you are in the capital, if you are in Pyongyang, and there's a power outage, and you criticize government for that power outage, you're going to disappear, right? You're labeled an enemy of the state. Well, what do we have now? You know, it's funny because you have a Fox producer that put wannabe dictator arrest political opponents on the screen during a Biden speech as Trump was given his speech after being indicted. And he offered to resign, then he was immediately terminated. And think about that a second. And then you had people on the left that were screaming that this person should be in jail. Well, call me crazy, but that sounds a little fascist to me. You can't poke fun at the dear leader anymore? At President Biden? I mean, this is a guy, again, he doesn't have all his mental faculties there. He is someone that just reads what's on the teleprompter. And he reads things like this.
We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us. So please do the right thing.
That sounds pretty authoritarian to me. You have people on the left that are screaming that any news organization that dissents from the approved narratives, those news organizations should have their broadcast licensing pulled. I never heard people on the conservative side calling for the removal of broadcasting license. I think the furthest that they've gone on the conservative side was calling for the defunding of PBS and NPR. That's the extent that those organizations shouldn't receive taxpayer-funded dollars. But they never said that MSNBC or CNN should be banned. They might mock and ridicule MSNBC and CNN, but they don't call for them to be taken off the air. So who really are the authoritarians? Who really are the ones that exhibit fascist tendencies? When you have Carol Crawford from the CDC telling Twitter that they have to remove posts that have unauthorized, unapproved opinions. That only them, only the bureaucrats, only the anointed ones, the guardians of democracy, can have unapproved opinions. Just look at how they're treating Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, obviously, I'm not a supporter of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., never has been and probably never will be. There are some things that he says I agree with. There's a hell of a lot that I disagree with. However, look at how they're attempting to destroy him. Now, this is a guy similar to Trump, right? Prior to President Trump announcing he's running for president in 2016, prior to him announcing that, he was revered in Democrat circles. He was revered in the entertainment industry. They all kissed his ass. And then when he got into power, they despised him. He was a dictator. I mean, they would go to him to get political donations. They would go to him and invite him to all their events. They would all kiss his ring. But the second he deviated from the narrative, well, now he was going to be a target. The same thing holds true with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I mean, he's part of the Kennedy clan. And he was revered in Democrat. He went to all the fundraisers. He was invited to do all these speeches for all these organizations. Do you think he's getting invited to any far-left progressive think tanks anymore? Do you think he's getting invited to give any of these speeches anymore? Do you think he's getting invited to fundraisers anymore? They will eat their own. They don't care. They will toss you overboard, and they will destroy you. And that's what the self-anointed guardians of democracy want. I was reading a report, it was on The Intercept, and it was talking about the U.S. Army Protective Services, where there's a little-known Secret Service equivalent, and they're tasked with safeguarding top military brass. Now, when you resign from the military, if you're a former high-ranking official, the Army Protective Services is still tasked with protecting you. And part of its mandate is to look at any types of threats, whether they're direct or indirect, whether there's any assassination or kidnapping attempts. Don't forget, former military brass, they have a lot of institutional knowledge, and so they're always going to be targets, and we get that. However, this group also is monitoring those that express opinions, criticize, or make assumptions on former top-level defense officials. Think about that for a minute. But when you are talking about intruding on someone's privacy, when you are talking about silencing and censoring people or watching them, monitoring their activities. So I criticized General Milley on a number of occasions throughout his tenure as the Army Chief of Staff. And we're going to sit here and say that if you mock or criticize a general or a retired general in any way, that they're going to be able to monitor you and investigate you? Does that sound like a free democratic society to you? Does it? And this is the problem that we have in this society. You have these self-anointed guardians of democracy that are undermining every single democratic norm that was known to exist. And this has been in the works for quite some time. It's ramped up over the course of the last several years, but it's been in the works for quite some time. And it is truly stunning, and at the same time, it's terrifying. It's terrifying that more people don't see this threat. More people don't see how these self-anointed guardians of democracy are willing to destroy everything only because they want to retain their power and control. And that's part of the problem. Now, as I said at the beginning of this episode, over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to get into how it all started and how we arrived at this moment today and where we go from here. This cabal needs to be broken up. It needs to be dismantled. And the only way you really begin to dismantle it is by removing the one thing that feeds it, and that's power. Remove their power. And that's why we have to stay on top of Congress, because many of these departments and agencies, they need to either be reduced or completely eliminated because they've shown they cannot be trusted with this power. And once you start filtering it at the top, you'll see that it will trickle down to all the other industries that I mentioned previously. So you are going to want to stay tuned to this podcast because it's going to be really informative. And if you found the contents of this episode informative, please take 30 seconds, give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, and write a review. Also, share it with your family, friends, and on social media. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.